I was really lucky, because I kind of started at the top. You go to #2 in the charts with your first record, and obviously from then onwards downwards for a while.
He once filled Wembley Stadium with sound so loud the steel beams trembled. Yet today, in a quiet villa in Portugal, an 84-year-old man sits alone, watching the news as helicopters circle above his English home. The headline scrolling across the screen reads, "Police raid home of Sir Cliff Richard." For a moment, he doesn't move. Then the truth hits. His own life has become the spectacle. This isn't a movie. It's live television. His bedroom, his photographs, his private world broadcast to millions. The man who embodied decency and joy in British pop is being treated like a criminal. The BBC, once his partner in fame, has made a secret deal with police to capture the raid. A national treasure is being humiliated in real time. How could it come to this? How could the smiling boy who carried Britain through the post-war gloom become its scapegoat? To find out, we have to travel back, long before Wembley, long before mistletoe and wine, to the other side of the world. Back to India in 1940, where a boy named Harry Webb was born into chaos. A boy who would cross oceans, trade identities, and build an empire on music, only to watch it almost destroyed. This is the story of faith under fire, love that never healed, and fame that never truly protects you. October 14, 1940, Lucknow, British India. Amid the thunder of bombs and the rumble of protest, Harry Roger Webb entered a world already shaking. His father worked for the Colonial Rail Service. His mother kept the family together as riots erupted beyond their windows. India was changing faster than anyone could understand. When independence finally neared, British families fled. The Webbs joined them, packing their lives into a few trunks and boarding a slow, overcrowded ship called the SS Ranchi. For 3 long weeks they drifted across the Indian Ocean, leaving the only home they had ever known. On deck, 10-year-old Harry watched the horizon and felt something break and something else ignite. He promised himself that one day people would know his name. England greeted them with ration books, damp air, and suspicion toward returning colonials. The family settled in a tiny house in Surrey, far from the warmth of India. But Harry found new heat in the crackle of American records. Elvis, Little Richard, Buddy Holly. He practiced in the mirror, using a broom as a microphone. Then came Harry Greatrex, a talent manager who looked him up and down and said, "You've got the voice, son. But Harry Webb? That's not a name for the radio." He scribbled a new one on a napkin. Cliff Richard. Cliff, solid, British, immovable. Richard, for the king of rock and roll. That moment was baptism by reinvention. Harry Webb disappeared. Cliff Richard was born, part rebellion, part reinvention, and entirely ambition. What he didn't know was that the same need to prove himself, born from exile, would drive him to the top of Britain and nearly destroy him later. August 29, 1958. A new single crackled over the radio. Move It. Guitars snarled, drums pounded, and a teenager's voice snapped with attitude. In a country still gray from war, the sound was a lightning bolt. Cliff Richard was only 18, yet his defiance gave British youth a heartbeat of their own. The song hit #2, and overnight, Cliff became the face of rebellion. Parents panicked, priests condemned him, and teenagers worshipped him. Girls carved his name into school desks. Boys copied his hair. He wasn't copying America anymore. He was giving Britain its own soundtrack. Then came Living Doll. He hated it, thought it was too syrupy. But his producer slowed it down into a gentle country shuffle. Against his instincts, it became a monster hit. 6 weeks at #1, nearly 1 million copies sold. Suddenly, Cliff wasn't just popular, he was unavoidable. Concerts became riots. At one show, the police had to form a human wall as fans stormed the stage. Reporters called it Cliff Fever. He smiled through it all, the perfect blend of innocence and danger. "I'd never even kissed a girl," he later joked. "But the papers wrote like I'd corrupted a generation." Hollywood took notice. In Serious Charge, he played a brooding youth accused of moral corruption. a role uncomfortably close to the headlines that would one day haunt him. Espresso Bongo followed, mocking the music industry's greed. Critics realized Cliff wasn't just a pop puppet. He had insight and control. By 1960, he was the biggest act in Britain, an idol who made rebellion look polite. Yet behind the smile, the pressure was crushing. "It felt like I was acting even off stage," he admitted. "Everyone wanted the same grin, the same voice. They didn't want me to change. But change was coming." The premiere of Summer Holiday? London's Leicester Square turned into a riot of flashbulbs and screaming fans. Cliff couldn't reach the red carpet. Security had to smuggle him out through a side door. Inside, the movie played to chaos. Girls crying, cameras snapping, grown men shaking their heads at a phenomenon they couldn't control. The soundtrack hit #1 before the film even opened nationwide. For 14 straight weeks, it ruled the charts. Songs like The Next Time, Bachelor Boy, and Summer Holiday turned post-war gloom into color. Cliff wasn't just a singer anymore. He was Britain's first multimedia star, cinema's clean-cut dream. Yet success became a cage. The press dubbed him the boy who never sinned. He couldn't smoke, swear, or be seen with a girlfriend. "I'd created a version of myself the world expected me to be," he later said. "Then I had to live with him." But the winds of music were shifting. Across the country, 4 lads from Liverpool were tuning their guitars. The revolution was about to begin, and Cliff was about to find out what happens when the crown starts to slip. When Beatlemania exploded in 1964, everyone predicted Cliff's demise. The Beatles had attitude, Cliff had manners. They had America, he had the BBC. Yet when the dust settled, Cliff still stood tall. That same year, he released Constantly, On the Beach, and I Could Easily Fall in Love with You. All hit the top 10, quietly outcharting the Fab Four in their own country. While Lennon sneered about revolution, Cliff kept delivering melodies families could actually sing. Even his supposed rivals paid respect. Before Cliff and Move It, there was nothing worth listening to in England, Lennon admitted. McCartney added, "We went to Hamburg because Cliff already had Britain sewn up." At the cinema, Summer Holiday battled A Hard Day's Night. Both smashed records, but only one had come first, and the Beatles knew it. In a 1965 international poll, Cliff was voted the world's top male singer, beating Elvis, Lennon, and McCartney combined. His secret was balance. While others chased shock value, Cliff offered stability. To a nation whiplashed by social change, he was safe but never dull, charming yet grounded. "I wasn't trying to be fashionable," he said later. "I was trying to be myself." It worked, for a time. June 1966, Earl's Court Arena. Tens of thousands gathered expecting a concert. Instead, they witnessed a confession. Cliff Richard stepped on stage beside American evangelist Billy Graham, looked out at the crowd that had adored him for a decade, and said, "I've given my life to Christ." The silence that followed was seismic. This was the swinging 60s. London ruled the world in fashion and sin. Rock stars didn't talk about salvation. They talked about rebellion. Cliff had broken an unspoken rule. Fans wept. Others walked out. The tabloids called it career suicide. For months, he questioned himself. Could he sing love songs and still serve his faith? Should he leave show business altogether? He even considered becoming a teacher or missionary. "I thought maybe God didn't want me in music anymore," he said. But one night, alone with his guitar, he decided to stay. If his gift was music, he'd use it differently. He began blending faith and pop, songs of hope instead of hedonism. The result was revolutionary. Proof you didn't have to destroy yourself to be authentic. The industry mocked him. Yet by standing firm, Cliff pioneered something new. A public life of faith inside pop culture. "I didn't lose my freedom," he reflected. "I found it." That conviction changed him. The fake grin disappeared. The nervous boy from Lucknow finally looked comfortable in his own skin. Even as the charts shifted to psychedelia and protest, Cliff stood as a reminder that rebellion isn't always loud. It can also be steadfast. He had survived the 1960s with integrity intact, but the 1970s would test whether integrity could keep the lights on. By the mid-1970s, Cliff's career seemed over. For the first time since his debut, he had no charting single. Younger acts filled the airwaves. Radio called him outdated. He considered retirement. Then came Devil Woman in 1976, a sharp, mysterious rock song about a psychic's curse. It was darker, bolder, and utterly unlike anything he'd done before. To everyone's shock, it roared into the top 10 in both Britain and America, selling over 2 million copies. Suddenly, the rock establishment embraced him. Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, and Elton John wore badges reading "I'm Nearly Famous," the title of Cliff's comeback album. Critics who once mocked him now called the record as vital as Marvin Gaye. Cliff had reinvented himself without losing his soul. He didn't chase trends. He mastered them. "Faith doesn't make you dull," he said. "It makes you fearless." The boy from the 1950s was now competing with arena giants of the 70s, and winning. After years of whispers that he'd fade away, Cliff Richard was suddenly timeless. If the 1970s were redemption, the 1980s were triumph. In 1987, he released Always Guaranteed, a sleek modern pop album that avoided the cliches of the decade. It went platinum, stayed on the charts for 24 weeks, and proved Cliff could still outsing and outsell acts half his age. Then came Christmas, 1988. Mistletoe and Wine hit the airwaves, a gentle song about kindness and faith. Recorded in the heat of summer with tinsel hanging over the microphone, it shot to #1 and stayed there for 4 weeks. It outsold U2, Kylie Minogue, and Phil Collins, becoming the year's biggest single. Even decades later, the royalties still poured in. In May 1989, he released his 100th single, something no British artist had ever achieved. To celebrate, he invited 2,000 fans to the London Palladium to help choose which song should mark the milestone. Their pick, "The Best of Me," reached #2 and became one of his proudest achievements. That same summer came the event, a 2-night spectacle at Wembley Stadium that felt more like a national holiday than a concert. The first half recreated the 1950s TV show Oh Boy that had launched him. The second showcased his modern hits. Cameras rolled, and the performance was broadcast worldwide. Cliff wasn't just reliving history, he was rewriting it in real time. Awards followed. In 1989, he received the Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music. By then, he had topped charts in 5 consecutive decades: the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. No one else had ever done that. In 1990, he stood on the same stage as Paul McCartney, Elton John, Pink Floyd, and Phil Collins at the massive Nebworth charity concert. Rain drenched the crowd, but nobody left. When Cliff took the microphone, the soaked audience erupted. Decades after Move It, he still owned the moment. Later that year, he released Savior's Day, another Christmas anthem that dethroned Ice Ice Baby for the #1 spot. In the video, filmed on a warm September beach, extras wore scarves and gloves, pretending it was winter. The result was magic. By the early 90s, Cliff Richard had become part of Britain's DNA. He wasn't just a star, he was an institution. CTA appears here. And if you've been captivated by how one man defied an entire culture, from colonial India to Wembley glory, stick around. The next chapters reveal how that same man would be betrayed by the country he once defined. Don't miss what happens next. In 1971, Cliff hosted a television special and invited a young Australian singer named Olivia Newton-John. The chemistry was instant. Laughter, glances, a musical harmony that felt like fate. Cliff later said, "I knew straight away she'd be a friend for life." But behind the friendship, deeper feelings grew. In his autobiography, he finally admitted he had fallen in love with her. The tragedy was simple. She was engaged to someone else. Bruce Welch, Cliff's bandmate from the Shadows. The triangle was painful. Bruce's affair with Olivia became tabloid fuel, and when it ended, he spiraled into depression. Cliff remained silent, caught between loyalty and longing. "I never told her," he wrote decades later. "I didn't want to lose her friendship." Despite the heartbreak, they performed together for 50 years, duets that captured everything unsaid. Their 1980 hit Suddenly from Xanadu still feels like a confession set to music. Their final duet came in 2015 at his 75th birthday concert. She was glowing, her voice still angelic. 3 weeks before she died in 2022, Cliff called her. "Good day, Cliff." "How are you, darling?" she said, cheerful as ever. When she passed, he couldn't bring himself to use the word death. "She didn't die," he said softly. "She just stopped living." For Cliff, it wasn't just losing a friend. It was saying goodbye to the only woman he ever truly loved. August 14, 2014. Cliff Richard sat in his Portuguese home sipping coffee when the phone rang. A friend told him to turn on the BBC. He did, and froze. Helicopters hovered over his Berkshire estate. Police in blue jackets streamed through his front door. Reporters shouted outside his gate. It looked like a burglary, except the burglars had cameras. The BBC had been tipped off in advance by South Yorkshire police, who promised them an exclusive. Internally, BBC staff called it the money shot. The accusation? That in 1985, during a Billy Graham rally, Cliff had assaulted a teenage boy. The claim was flimsy. The supposed location didn't even exist at the time. But facts no longer mattered. What mattered was footage. For nearly 2 years, Cliff lived under investigation with no charges. He couldn't sleep. He lost weight. Shingles erupted across his body. "I felt my home had been contaminated," he said. Friends described him as a ghost. The BBC aired the raid live in dozens of countries. The same broadcaster that once televised his Christmas specials now televised his humiliation. Newspapers ran the story for months, never letting the accusation die. Even after it became clear the claim was false, the circus continued. One man tried to blackmail him, threatening to invent more lies unless paid. The police arrested the man, but still kept Cliff under scrutiny. He later said, "I didn't think I'd survive it. I thought I'd have a stroke or a heart attack." The ordeal cost taxpayers nearly £800,000 and left him psychologically shattered. To make matters worse, the BBC submitted its raid coverage for Scoop of the Year. Judges later called that decision arrogant and humiliating. For a man who had spent a lifetime singing about decency and grace, the betrayal cut deep. The institution he'd trusted to protect truth had traded it for spectacle. The price was his peace. Justice came slowly. Cliff sued both the police and the BBC, not just for himself, but for everyone who could be publicly destroyed without proof. The courtroom became another stage, but this time the audience saw tears instead of applause. He described sleepless nights, fear of going outside, the sense that people looked at him differently even after being cleared. "I couldn't meet anyone's eyes," he said. "They all knew my name, but now they wondered." In 2018, the High Court ruled decisively in his favor. The judge declared that Cliff Richard had a reasonable expectation of privacy and that the BBC's coverage had been a serious and sensationalist intrusion. For the first time, British law formally recognized that fame did not erase one's right to dignity. Cliff won £400,000 from South Yorkshire Police and over £2 million in damages and legal costs from the BBC. But winning didn't feel like victory. "They took my reputation and gave me a receipt," he said bitterly afterward. "I got justice on paper, but you can't buy back peace of mind." Even years later, Cliff avoided news cameras and interviews, afraid that any public appearance would reignite suspicion. The damage was done. The whisper would always follow. He called it an invisible sentence. Though exonerated, he felt marked for life. He said the raid changed him in ways no court could undo. "I'm not the same man who sang congratulations. I'm still grateful. But trust, that's gone." Still, he refused to disappear completely. He returned to music, carefully, quietly, touring for loyal fans who never stopped believing in him. His comeback wasn't about records or ratings. It was survival. "Music saved me again," he told a crowd in 2019, his voice trembling. "It reminded me who I am." That night, as the audience gave him a standing ovation, Cliff looked up, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thank you." It was the sound of a man finally reclaiming his name, not from fame, but from the silence that tried to erase him. Today, Cliff Richard lives quietly between his homes in Barbados and Portugal, surrounded by the serenity he once fought so hard to find. The man who spent decades performing under blinding lights now wakes up to ocean sunrises and the sound of waves instead of applause. Mornings are slow and sacred. He makes his coffee, hums an old melody under his breath, and walks the beach barefoot. Sometimes strangers recognize him. Most of the time, they don't. And that suits him fine. "I used to need the noise," he once said. "Now I just need peace." That peace, however, was hard-won. Cliff's life isn't the story of a man who retired from fame. It's the story of a man who survived it. The boy from Lucknow who crossed the sea during the fall of the empire had already seen one world collapse before he even knew what the next would demand. The spotlight wasn't just his reward, it was his second war. Every stage, every interview, every scream of the crowd was both validation and battle. Over 70 years, Cliff Richard became many things to many people: a pop idol, a symbol of moral restraint, a Christian role model, and later, a tabloid target. Through every transformation, he remained something the modern world rarely forgives: uncomplicatedly decent. When others courted scandal, he sought stillness. When others reinvented themselves through shock, Cliff reinvented himself through grace. It's easy to forget now, but before the Beatles, before Bowie, before Elton John, there was Cliff. He wasn't following the British music scene, he was building it. Move It laid the foundation for the sound of a generation. John Lennon called it the first British rock record that mattered. Without Cliff, there would have been no blueprint for British rock to begin with. And yet, for all his achievements, Cliff's greatest strength wasn't innovation. It was endurance. His career spanned 7 decades, with #1 singles in 5 of them. He adapted from vinyl to streaming, from monochrome television to HD concerts, from handwritten fan letters to social media tributes. When other legends collapsed under the weight of excess, Cliff aged with discipline and purpose. No arrests, no rehab, no scandals, just songs. Still, his legacy isn't spotless in memory. The 2014 raid left a scar that time can't fully erase. In interviews, he often avoids talking about it, not out of denial, but exhaustion. "I don't want it to be my ending," he said. "It's one chapter. I've had many. The public humiliation, though devastating, also gave him perspective. It reminded him that fame is fleeting, and faith, once again, is what lasts." He's spoken often about forgiveness. "I had to forgive them," he told a journalist, referring to the BBC and the police. "If I didn't, I'd still be chained to it." That simple act, choosing forgiveness over revenge, became his quiet revolution. It's the same spiritual resilience that once shocked audiences in 1966 at Earl's Court. Only now, it feels like the final verse of a much larger song. Despite the trauma, Cliff's later years haven't been sad. They've been graceful. He still tours selectively, choosing intimate theaters over arenas. In 2023, he released Cliff with Strings, My Kind of Life, revisiting his classics with orchestral depth. Critics called it his most honest album in years. Fans said it felt like coming home. His voice, though lower, carries something richer, an ache earned by experience, a calm only survivors carry. Offstage, he's surrounded by old friends, faith, and familiarity. Photographs of Olivia Newton-John sit framed on his piano. Her loss hit him deeply, but her memory still fills his concerts. He often dedicates songs to her, smiling softly before singing. He once said, "We never needed to say what we felt. The music said it for us." He rarely gives long interviews now. When he does, he speaks slowly, choosing words the way he once chose notes, carefully, meaningfully. Asked once if he felt bitter about the way Britain treated him, Cliff paused and said, "No, I feel grateful. Maybe pain was the only way I'd remember what peace really feels like." To younger generations, Cliff Richard might seem like a distant name from another era, but his influence remains everywhere. From the British pop infrastructure he built to the moral blueprint he modeled, he showed that fame doesn't have to corrupt, that kindness isn't weakness, and that faith isn't a limitation, it's a compass. He's still Britain's best-selling male solo artist, still the only performer to reach #1 across 5 consecutive decades, still the man whose songs have soundtracked weddings, holidays, and generations of lives. And perhaps most importantly, still the man who refused to let a lie become his legacy. Cliff Richard once said, "They tried to ruin me, but they couldn't take my song." Maybe that's what keeps him eternal. When the world moved on, he didn't chase it. He simply kept singing. And in the silence after the storm, that song still echoes. When the final note fades and the lights dim, Cliff often lingers on stage a little longer, looking out at the audience, absorbing the applause. It's softer now, less hysterical, more reverent. The screams of teenage fandom have become the quiet respect of a nation that once doubted him, and perhaps, finally, remembers. Because Cliff Richard didn't vanish from the spotlight. He simply learned how to shine without it. If this story moved you, stay with us, because we're just getting started. From legends who conquered fame to those who were broken by it, we bring you the untold stories behind the voices that shaped entire generations. So keep watching, because the next story might just change how you see your favorite icon forever.